On behalf of the Centennial Skating Club, please welcome to the ice Sophia. On behalf of the Centennial Skating Club, please welcome to the ice Sophia Thomas. Thank you, Sophia.
Кион? Кион. Сериал «Хрустальный»?
Да.
А папа на комедии подсел.
А я смотрю все подряд. И мне так классно.
Вот что с людьми делает Кион.
Today I'm going to show you how the alphabet has evolved over the last 4,000 years, from its earliest forms to the modern Latin script, which is the alphabet that is used today to write English and many other languages. I'll be using my recently updated Evolution of the Alphabet chart, which is the alphabet that is used today to write Evolution of the Alphabet chart, which is available as a poster from my website usefulcharts.com. I'll be starting by giving you a general overview of the various stages that the alphabet has gone through, and then I'll be taking a look at several of the individual letters, one by one. So the first thing you need to know is that not all writing systems are alphabets. In a previous video, which I'll link to in the description, I talked about 5 main types of writing systems. Of these 5 types, the earliest one to develop was the logosyllabary. A good example of a logosyllabary is ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. In most cases, a hieroglyphic symbol did not represent a single sound, like in an alphabet. Instead, it represented an entire word or syllable. But at some point, approximately 4,000 years ago, someone in Egypt had the idea to use hieroglyphs in a new way. They devised a system by which there was just one symbol for every one phonetic sound. By doing so, they were able to reduce the total number of symbols needed for writing from several hundred to just 20 or 30. So, for example, this crude drawing of a house, shown from above like a floor plan, came to represent something like the sound B, and this fish came to represent something like the sound D. So it was in this way that the alphabet was born. The name given to this first version is Proto-Sinaitic. It gets its name from the Sinai Peninsula, which connects Egypt to what was once the land of Canaan. It was here that the first inscriptions made using this script were found, although examples have since been found in both Egypt and the southern Levant as well. Because of this, there's some debate over whether the invention of the alphabet took place in Egypt or Canaan. However, what we do know is that it was in Canaan that the idea of using an alphabetic form of writing really took off, because by the year 1000 BCE, and in the centuries that followed it, we have lots of examples of a stylized version of the script being used throughout the Levant, both by the Phoenicians and by the ancient Israelites. Generally, this version of the alphabet is called Phoenician, although when found at ancient Israelite sites, it is called Paleo-Hebrew. But basically, at ancient Israelite sites, it is called Paleo-Hebrew. But basically, they're the same. Note that I've shown the more familiar Paleo-Hebrew. But when found at ancient Israelite sites, it is called Phoenician. Although when found at ancient Israelite sites, it is called Paleo-Hebrew. But basically, they're the same. Note that I've shown the more familiar square Hebrew letters below for reference, and so that we have names that we can use for these early symbols, like Aleph, Bet, and Gimel. It's interesting to note that the earliest portions of the Hebrew Bible would have been written in this ancient script, not in the square letters used by Jews today. Those developed several hundred years later. But on this chart, we are concerned with the evolution of the Latin script. So instead of tracing the development of these early letters into later Middle Eastern scripts, like Hebrew and Arabic, we are now going to turn our attention to the Greeks. I've labeled this third line Archaic Greek in order to distinguish it from the more familiar classical Greek letters, which are still used today. However, I've shown the modern ones below line Archaic Greek in order to distinguish it from I've labeled this third line Archaic Greek in order to distinguish it from the more familiar classical Greek letters, which are still used today. However, I've shown the modern ones below for reference, so that once again, we have names that we can use for each letter. I also want to point out that there was never a single archaic Greek alphabet. There were actually many different versions with slight variations that were used throughout the Greek-speaking world. So what you see here is a bit of a combined representation. The important thing I want to point out at this stage is that the sound value of several letters changed significantly. Prior to the Greeks, the alphabet was strictly a consonant alphabet, also known as an abjad. This means there were no symbols that stood for vowels. But the Greeks changed this. There were several Phoenician letters that they did not have a use for, such as the aleph and hey. So they instead repurposed those symbols to stand in for vowel sounds. So aleph became alpha, which is an A sound, and hey became epsilon, which is an E sound. But the shapes of these letters basically stayed the same. So keep in mind that this entire chart is focused on the evolution of the letter shapes, even though those letters were often pronounced differently at different times and places. I'll also point out that it is from the first two letters of the Greek alphabet, alpha and beta, that we get the word alphabet. Okay, so the next stage is Old Italic. Again, there was no single Old Italic alphabet. Instead, there were many different versions, of which the most important was perhaps the Etruscan alphabet. But what I've shown here is kind of an amalgam of different Old Italic scripts. The most important thing to point out at the Old Italic stage is that several letters were dropped. This is because there were some sounds that Greek speakers made that Latin speakers did not. So, for example, the Greek letter theta was not needed for ancient Latin, so the ancient Latins simply dropped it from the alphabet. I'll talk about some other changes in a bit, but for now, take note that the actual letter shapes didn't really change much between these two stages. And many of the shapes are actually quite recognizable, even in these archaic forms. It was during the period of the Roman Empire that the Latin alphabet reached the form that we know today, although at this point only the capital letters existed. It's important to note that the ancient Romans did not distinguish between an uppercase and a lowercase. It's also important to note that they did not have 26 letters like we do today. They had only 23. Missing were J, U, and W. So during the lifetime of Julius Caesar, his name would have been written like this. I'll say more about J and U in a moment, but the biggest question that most people have at this point on the chart is, why did some of the letters flip? Well, originally many of the letters like B or K could be written either way. This was because originally the Greeks and Romans wrote both left to right as well as right to left. And the direction of certain letters depended on the direction of the writing. But eventually, writing left to right became standard, perhaps because most people are right-handed and therefore less smudging takes place when you write left to right. Of course, when it comes to alphabets like Hebrew and Arabic, they are written in the opposite direction, right to left. Now, at the same time that the familiar Roman square capitals were being carved into stone, everyday writing, among those who were literate, was actually taking place in a slightly different script, known as cursive. The word cursive coming from the Latin root for running, or doing something quickly. So originally, Roman cursive looked something like this, sort of a sloppy version of the capitals. But eventually it evolved into what became known as New Cursive. So by the time that the Western Roman Empire fell, the emperors would have been writing out their various decrees using letters like these ones. You can see that many of them look quite similar to the lowercase letters that we use today. Of course, when the Western Empire fell in 476, much of Europe experienced a so-called Dark Age, during which time there was far less writing going on. However, one of the places where a lot of writing did continue was in the Christian monasteries over in Ireland. There, a script developed known as Insular, which also ended up being adopted by the Anglo-Saxons over on the island of Great Britain. Therefore, this style of writing is also sometimes called Old English. A little while later, over on the continent, a slightly different style of lettering developed called this style of writing is also sometimes called Old English. A little while later, over on the continent, a slightly different style of lettering developed insular in Ireland. There, a script developed known as insular, which also ended up being adopted by the Anglo-Saxons. Going fell in 476, much of the time there was far less writing was in the Christian monasteries over in Ireland. There, a script developed on. However, one of the places where a lot of writing a script developed known as insular, which also ended up being adopted by the Anglo-Saxons over on the island of Great Britain. Therefore, this style of writing is also sometimes called Old English. A little while later, over on the continent, a slightly different style of lettering developed called Carolingian. This version of the alphabet emerged during the reign of Charlemagne, and by the year 1000, it had become standard throughout most of Europe. But remember, the printing press hadn't yet been invented, so all books were written by hand, which obviously took a long time. So as literacy grew and the demand for books increased, scribes eventually developed a script which they could write more quickly. This style was known as blackletter or Gothic, and it was the dominant style up until the time that Gutenberg developed his famous printing press in the 1400s. At that point, the letter shapes quickly started to look like the lowercase letters we see in serif fonts today, and were combined with the old Roman capitals, which were used at the start of sentences in order to increase readability. So now that we've done that in order to increase old Roman capitals, which were used at the start of sentences in order to combined with the old Roman capitals in serif fonts today, and were combined with the old Roman capitals, which were used at the start of sentences in order to increase readability. So now that we've done that overview, let's go back and talk about some of the individual letters. In English, the first three letters of the alphabet are A, B, C. But in the Hebrew and Greek alphabets, which are older, the first three letters are the equivalent of A, B, G. The third letter, in both cases, being a G sound. What happened is this. Sometime during the period of the Roman Republic, the third letter of the alphabet started playing double duty and was used for both a G sound and a K sound. This led the Romans to make a major change to the alphabet. They kept the third letter where it was, but dedicated it to the K sound. And they created a new letter, which looked very similar, and placed it as the seventh letter. This new letter, which was basically just a C with an extra little line, became G and was dedicated to the G sound. But there was a problem. By this point, the order of the alphabet had become standard, and each letter was associated with a number. So when the Romans placed the letter G in the number 7 spot, they had to move the letter that had previously been at the number 7 spot. That letter was the letter Z, also known as Z. The Romans didn't use that letter very much, so they simply moved it all the way to the end, which is why the alphabet today ends with the letter Z. One of the most important letters in the alphabet in terms of its evolution is the 6th letter, which today is our letter F. That's because there are 5 letters in our alphabet today that all trace their origin to this one letter. Originally, it was depicted as a walking stick or staff and was probably pronounced something like W. In Hebrew, it is known as Vav. But when the Greeks adopted the alphabet from the Phoenicians, they split this one letter into 2. They called the original letter digamma because for them it looked similar to gamma, but had an extra line. Hence, it was a double gamma, or digamma. It was eventually dropped from the Greek alphabet, but it stayed on in the Latin alphabet and became our letter F. But the Greeks also added a slightly different version of the digamma to the end of their alphabet and called it upsilon. Remember that the Greeks added vowels to the alphabet, and this letter was one of their vowels, something close to what we call the vowel U. However, in the Latin version of the alphabet, this letter was split into V and Y, and the letter V ended up playing several roles at once. Sometimes it was a vowel, like in Julius, but sometimes it was a consonant, like in the word valens, which means strong, although the Romans would have pronounced it closer to valens. Eventually, the letter came to look like our U, closer to strong, although the Romans would have pronounced it closer to valens. Eventually, the letter came to look like our U, but it continued to do the work of both U and V, as well as sometimes W, all the way up until the was some Latin versions, something close. Greeks added to the end of their alphabet. The Greeks also added a slightly different version of the digamma to the end of their alphabet and called it upsilon. Remember that the Greeks added vowels to the alphabet, and this letter was one of their vowels, something close to what we call the vowel U. However, in the Latin version of the alphabet, this letter was split into V and Y, and the letter V ended up playing several roles at once. The Latin vowel, different version, and was eventually dropped. Hence, it was a double gamma, or to gamma, but had an extra line, because for them, it letter into two. They adopted the alphabet from the Phoenicians. They split this one letter into two. They called the original letter digamma, because it's known as vav. But when the Greeks adopted the alphabet from the Phoenicians, they split this one letter into two. They called the original letter digamma, because for them, it looked similar to gamma, but had an extra line. Hence, it was a double gamma, or digamma. It was eventually dropped from the Greek alphabet, but it stayed on in the Latin alphabet and became our letter F. But the Greeks also added a slightly different version of the digamma to the end of their alphabet and called it upsilon. Remember that the Greeks added vowels to the alphabet, and this letter was one of their vowels, something close to what we call the vowel U. However, in the Latin version of the alphabet, this letter was split into V and Y, and the letter V ended up playing several roles at once. Sometimes it was a vowel, like in Julius, but sometimes it was a consonant, like in the word valens, which means strong, although the Romans would have pronounced it closer to valens. Eventually, the letter came to look like our U, closer to strong, although the Romans would have pronounced it closer to valens. Eventually, the letter came to look like our U, but it continued to do the work of both U and V, as well as sometimes W, all the way up until the invention of the printing press. At that point, it was split into U and V, and then eventually a W was added as well, which strangely actually often looks more like a double V. The other letter that we have today that wasn't in the original Latin alphabet is the letter J. Throughout most of history, the letter J was just a fancy version of the letter I, used whenever it came at the beginning of a word. But eventually, in many languages, it evolved as a unique sound, and therefore the fancy I was eventually added to the alphabet as the letter J. Let's now take a look at some of the letters that used to be in the alphabet but are no longer around. As I mentioned earlier, some of them was eventually added to the alphabet as the letter J. Let's now take a look at some of the letters that used to be in the alphabet but are no longer around. As I mentioned earlier, the Romans dropped a lot of Greek letters because they simply didn't need them. These included theta and psi, but also a letter called san that the Greeks ended up dropping as well. I should also point out that the Greeks added several new letters that never made their way into the Latin alphabet. These include phi, psi, and omega, which was based on the letter O, and also sampi, which the Greeks dropped as well. The only Greek-created letter that did make it into the Latin alphabet is the letter chi, which we call X. Finally, I want to point out two medieval letters that once upon a time were used to write English, but are no longer a part of our modern alphabet. Anyone who has studied a bit of Old English is likely familiar with these. They are thorn and win, and in both cases, their letter shape. They are thorn and win, and in both cases, likely familiar with these. They are thorn and win, and in both cases, their letter shape was adopted from runic letters, as opposed to directly from Latin. Thorn was a th sound, and win was a w sound. But like I say, these two letters were eventually dropped, although thorn is still used in Iceland today. So that was a look at how the alphabet has changed over the centuries. Like I say, if you would like to buy a copy of the chart as a poster, you can head over to my website, usefulcharts.com, or simply follow the link on the screen now or in the description. Thanks for watching.
What's up, everybody? Welcome, welcome. Adam Manis here. We're doing something a little different today. Good to see y'all. Thanks for joining me. So last week I did a little something where I learned a new tune, Roy Hargrove's Top of My Head. And I texted my friend Peter Martin. I was like, give me a suggestion for a tune. That's what he came up with. And a lot of you said that was a really useful lesson format to kind of watch me learn it in real time. And so I thought I would do the same thing today, only this time, as we start here, I have no idea what I'm going to do. And so I'm going to ask you to give me some suggestions. So please give me some suggestions. Whatever you want. Well, not whatever you want. I'm gonna take your suggestions. I'm gonna pick the ones that I don't know, and I'll listen to a few, and then we'll just decide. Sound good? We'll give it a few as the room fills up. Smash that like button if you don't mind, to just kind of spread the word. But yeah, we're just gonna learn a new tune today, and I'll kind of narrate as we go. Sound good? Louis says oleo. Well, I kind of know that. And we'll see. After Donna Lee last week, I'm questioning everything, but we'll see how that goes. So that's the first suggestion, oleo. What's up, Rimsel from Munich? Yeah, give me a tune suggestion. I want to learn a new tune, something I don't know today, and I'll do it in real time, and we'll kind of narrate as we go what we're thinking. Sound good? What's up? And smash that like button so we can get more people in here and get more suggestions. But give me your tune. I already know Solar, Evie. Thank you. Gavin says Dance of the Maya. Colleen says Dat Dare. Gary says, but you know everything. Not at all. Not even close. Dorina Cole says Indian Summer. I don't know that one. That's a good suggestion. Dance of the Infidels, I kind of know. Jesse says Anomaly, Velours. I can check that one out for sure. Joy Spring, I already know. Nefertiti is one I know. Fee Fi Fo Fum is one I've played. I don't know it. Like I couldn't just play it for you, but I have played it. I'm looking for new tunes. do an Elmo Hope tune. That's a good suggestion. I remember Clifford. I've played. What's up, Antonio? Wrap your trouble in dreams is one I don't know. That's a good suggestion, Drew. Gerhard says, leave the door open. I'm not familiar with that at all. Colleen, Up Jump Spring, I know. I'd be always down for another Roy Hargrove tune. Ooh. A João Gilberto Baquinho. That's a great idea. Ooh, I love some Grant Green. Grant Green underrepresented on this YouTube channel as far as like how much we love him and how much we've not played his music. So, Night Streets is a chick tune I don't know, Juan. That's a great suggestion. These are all very good. Okay, I have some Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Brad Meldau, Born to Trouble. All right, we're getting some good suggestions here. Leave your suggestion of the tune we'll learn today. Almost Blue. That's a good one, Serge Ruiz. I don't know that. Agua de Beber, I know. Nacimiento. I think I've heard it, but I don't know it. That's a great suggestion. Okay, we have some contenders already. This is good. This is really good. Oh, I got my first vaccine shot this morning, so I'm feeling a little woozy. So we'll see how that factors into the whole situation here. What's up, Eduardo? Django, I kind of know. Steps, Chick Corea. Very early. I don't know. I've played it, Federico. That would be a challenging one to just get by ear. Capivara by Hermeto Pasquale. That's a great suggestion. Oh, Jacob Mann Big Band. Koji. I'm a fan of Jacob Mann. That's great. Like Oscar Peterson, we take request. Parisian Thoroughfare. Peter Martin has a great suggestion. I've played that before, though. That early Bud Powell stuff. I've done most of that at some point. All right, I have some. So let's check some out. You know what I mean? Let's see what we got here. So. Let's see here. Let's check out this João Gilberto Barquinho from Antonio. Hold on just a second. Let's see if we can get... Is that it? Yeah, that was it. All right, let me see here. Just a second. So... There it is. So we're going to have a listen and see if we can pull it out. You know what I mean? Let's see what we got here. Headphones.
For just $67, you can make as many videos as you want, and you never need to pick up a camera or use any fancy editing software. With Doodly, you drag, you drop, you tweak some settings, and boom, video done. It'll take you just a few minutes. So, let's hear from the Doodly creator, Brad, to see why Doodly is so easy to use and why you should grab this offer right now.
Hi, I'm Brad Callen, and in this video, I'm going to show you how anyone can quickly and easily create doodle videos, just like the one you're watching right now, using Doodly, our drag and drop doodle software that allows anyone, regardless of tech skills, to create highly engaging professional doodle videos in a matter of minutes. Because doodle videos are
What did you eat for breakfast this
Jam
morning?
sandwich, yeah.
You had a sandwich?
Yeah.
A jam sandwich?
Yeah.
Yeah, I always loved mathematics as a kid. So one of my earliest memories is when I was, I think, 2 years old, and my grandma was cleaning the windows at our home, and I was insisting that she put numbers on the she put the detergent on the windows in the form of numbers. So I always liked numbers and patterns and logic, and so things that are very black and white, where there's one right answer and everything else is wrong. I didn't like sort of subjective shades of grey type questions. I would work on math workbooks for fun. You know, if my parents wanted to shut me up, you'd just give me a workbook, and I would just do sums and so forth. So I always liked math competitions. Doing that was very different from doing research mathematics. The type of problems that you're given in a problem book and so forth, these are so very canned problems, things that you can do in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And they don't prepare you completely for a research problem where you have to spend 6 months, you have to read the literature, talk to people, try something doesn't work, modify it, try it again. And it's a very different experience doing research, but I like it a lot better actually than all the puzzles I used to do as a kid. I don't do these things very much anymore. My mother was a high school maths teacher when she was younger, so she did help me a little bit, when I was a kid, just talking numbers with me. And then I had a lot of very good mentors. When I was like 10 or 11, there was a retired maths professor in Adelaide, which I would go visit on the weekends. We'd have tea and cookies, and he would just discuss some recreational maths problem and so forth. And it was just a lot of fun. He would tell me stories about how he used maths during World War II and so forth, to do ballistics and so forth. It was kind of fun to actually see maths actually being used for something.
He had a PhD in maths from Princeton at 20 and was appointed Professor of Mathematics at UCLA at 24. I enjoyed it. I mean, when I was a kid, I mostly enjoyed doing maths and geeky things and so forth. And being accelerated and going to uni that early, I was around people who were older than me but had similar backgrounds, so we were at sort of the same level mathematically. So these people were 5 years older maybe, but we're both struggling with the same homework assignments. We both like to talk about various math concepts and so forth. So I felt at home. So I did miss out on maybe sort of the regular high school experience. So I didn't go to many high school social events and so forth. I did a lot of that actually once I was in grad school in Princeton. So then I hung around people my own age, and then I partied and so forth. So I sort of had a slightly reorganized childhood, but it worked out well for me.
And I have to say, Terence Tao was competing there, and he only got 1 out of 7. Let's actually cut Terence Tao some slack, the Fields medalist, the guy who's like coming close to solving the twin prime conjecture. It's actually pretty awesome because he was only 13 years old. He holds the record as the youngest person to ever have won a gold medal.
There was this question 6.
Oh yeah, that's a famous question, yes.
What's your recollection of it now, and why? And you didn't get it right.
No, I did not get it right.
How do you feel about that?
Well, you win some, you lose some. I have, it's so long ago now, I don't remember much about it. I do remember once the Olympiad was over, I found out that some Romanian woman had solved the question, and I remember searching out her, because it was really bugging me that I didn't know how to solve the question. There was a special trick to solve it, which at the time was not a standard trick that was taught. You have to use the method of descent. You have to, I forget the exact question. You had to show that something could not be a perfect square. It was always a perfect square. And show that if it wasn't, you could find a smaller counterexample and then a smaller one and a smaller one. I think nowadays it's become part of the standard training, so they all know the trick now. But yeah.
Were you competitive? Were you the sort of boy that would get upset about it, or was it just a fascination? I just want to know I want to know the answer. Were you the sort of boy that would get upset about it, or was it just a fascination? I just want to know I want to know the answer, or were you like angry you didn't get it?
I think I was more obsessive than competitive. Yeah, I mean, certainly I was a bit angry at myself for not getting it, but I wanted more to know the answer than to win, I think.
There's this famous image of you with Erdos,
yes.
this photo, which
yes.
is a great photograph.
Mm-hmm.
People want to know what you're discussing in that picture. What's going on there?
Yeah, so I think he was giving me a maths problem, which I did. I think I even know what it is, because he did send me a postcard afterwards with what may be the same problem. I have it somewhere. Yeah, I think it was some maths conference in Adelaide. Yeah, I was like 10 or something. I don't remember why I was there. Maybe some maths professor at the University of Adelaide told me to come. I understand, you know, he was always very good at speaking to mathematically gifted kids. And I don't remember much about our conversation, except that I remember I really felt like I was being treated like an equal. Like he wasn't condescending or anything. Like, you know, it was just a very pleasant conversation. You know, I mean, now Odysseus has passed. You know, I mean, it does have some sentimental value for me. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, I certainly wish I'd paid more attention to him. Actually, you know, I mean, like I'd heard of him, you know, as a child, but you know, it's just, you know, it was just someone, yeah. To me, he was just someone who'd like talking math to me, and that was great. He did write me a letter of recommendation for Princeton later on, so.
Panthère rose. C'est un morceau de niveau débutant, mais plutôt fin débutant parce que la main droite est un peu difficile, elle bouge beaucoup. Alors si vous n'avez jamais fait de piano, je vous conseille de commencer par le morceau Do Ré Mi La perdrix. C'est là que je vous apprends à repérer les touches et les notes sur un piano. Et puis après vous pouvez continuer par l'hymne à la joie ou Heart and Soul par exemple.
Специалисты компании Love Piano уже на связи и готовы вам помочь. Мы занимаемся только клавишными музыкальными.
Eh bien, salut à toutes et à tous, c'est Benjamin. Aujourd'hui, on se retrouve pour une nouvelle vidéo sur mon synthé. Donc, comme vous avez pu le voir au titre, je vais vous apprendre à jouer les Simpsons. Je sais pas. Non, en fait, on va pas jouer les Simpsons. On va jouer la Panthère rose, qui est un peu mieux, un peu plus simple. Parce que les Simpsons, je ne le gère pas encore à ce point-là. Donc voilà. Tout simplement, vous allez prendre dans les aigus ou les graves, je sais pas, tout au bout là-bas, quoi. Voilà. Alors c'est parti. Donc je vais vous la jouer. Voilà. Donc vous allez faire comme ceci. Voilà. Donc Ré dièse, Mi, Fa dièse, Si. Vous allez prendre. Donc on a fait là, deux fois la répétition là. Ensuite, encore. On prend là. On prend là. Donc, je vais vous la refaire avec l'index au ralenti. Donc, même si je ne le gère presque pas. Voilà, donc regardez. Voilà, c'est... Elle est incomplète de une. Et voilà quoi. N'hésitez pas à liker,
Et bonjour à tous et bienvenue dans cette nouvelle vidéo de piano musique. Aujourd'hui, nous allons apprendre le fameux morceau La Panthère Rose, ce super morceau de Henri Mancini qui vraiment a fait un morceau magnifique. Commençons donc tout de suite les explications. Si vous savez lire la musique, vous trouverez juste en dessous de la vidéo un lien qui va vous amener sur la partition que vous pourrez télécharger. Mais sinon, ce n'est pas grave, si vous ne savez pas lire la musique, vous pouvez de toute façon vous trouverez juste en dessous de la vidéo un lien qui va vous amener sur la partition que vous pourrez télécharger. Mais sinon, ce n'est pas grave, si vous ne savez pas lire la musique, vous pouvez de toute façon faire l'apprentissage de cette chanson avec la vidéo. Donc, commençons tout de suite par jouer le morceau en entier à vitesse normale, et ensuite on va le rejouer lentement, et je vais vous préciser 2-3 petites choses. Alors, c'est parti pour la version à vitesse normale. J'espère que ce petit arrangement que j'ai fait vous a plu. Il est relativement complexe si vous n'avez jamais fait de piano avant. Jouer les deux mains ensemble sera probablement trop compliqué. Mais vous pouvez bien sûr vous contenter de la main droite qui a la mélodie principale. Commençons donc tout de suite avec l'introduction où il y a à la main droite un si bémol et un mi que je joue 2-5 et ensuite une montée et descente à la main gauche.
Что обязательно нужно сделать эксперту, психологу, коучу или консультанту для того, чтобы начать зарабатывать? Все просто. Набрать много фолловеров в Instagram.
Can I ask you a question, Brady? What is the most difficult way to earn $1 million?
Making YouTube videos.
Well, you probably know much more about that than I do. One of the most difficult ones is to solve one of the millennium problems in mathematics, which were set by the Clay Mathematical Institute in the year 2000. One of these problems is called the Riemann hypothesis, and it refers to a work of a German mathematician, Bernhard Riemann, which he did in the year 1859. So this is just one of the problems. In fact, there are 7, and only one of them has been solved so far. And interestingly enough, the person who solved the problem has declined the $1 million. So it just shows that mathematicians work on these problems not because they want to make some money. I think it is now the most famous problem in mathematics. It took the place of Fermat's last theorem, which was solved by Andrew Wiles and Richard Taylor in the mid-1990s.
But that wasn't a millennium problem.
That was not a millennium problem. The most essential thing here is what we call the Riemann zeta function. And the Riemann zeta function is a function, so a function is a rule which assigns to every value a certain number. A Riemann zeta function, it assigns a certain number to any value of s, and that number is given by the following series. 1 divided by 1 to the power s, plus 1 divided by 2 to the power s, plus 1 divided by 3 to the power s, 4 to the s, and so on. So, for example, if we set s equals 2, zeta of 2 is going to be 1 divided by 1 squared, plus 1 divided by 2 squared, plus 1 divided by 3 squared, plus 1 divided by 4 squared, and so on. So, what is this? This is 1. This is 1 over 4, this is 1 over 9, 1 over 16. So this is an example of what mathematicians call a convergent series, which means that if you sum up the first n terms, you will get an answer which will get closer and closer to some number. And that number to which it approximates is called the limit. But the limit here is actually very interesting. And it has been a famous problem in mathematics to find that limit. It's called the Basel problem, named after the city of of Basel in Switzerland. And this Basel problem was solved by a great mathematician, Leonhard Euler. And the answer is very surprising. What Euler showed is that this sums up to pi squared over 6. And so you may be wondering, what does this sum have to do with the circle? Why would pi, or pi squared, show up? But Euler came up with a beautiful proof. I'm not going to explain it now, but it's something which you can easily find online. This series is just one example of this Riemann zeta function, but you can try to do the same for any other value of s. So for example, if you take s equals 3, you will get the reciprocals of all the cubes, and you sum them up, and so on. So this will again be a convergent series, and you can wonder what the answer is. That would be zeta of 3. You can also try to substitute negative numbers. And this is very interesting because if you just substitute s equals negative 1, then what are we going to get? So you will get 1 divided by 1 to the negative 1 plus 1 to the 2 to the negative 1 plus 1 to the 1 over 3 to the negative 1. If you take the reciprocal of something which is the inverse of something, then you will get that thing. So this will be 1, this will be 2, this will be 3, this will be 4. Does it look familiar?
Yes, I have seen that before.
We have arrived at the famous sum of all natural numbers, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. But you see, now we obtain it in the context of the zeta function. So this is what we call a divergent series. There is no obvious way how we could possibly assign a finite value to it. This sum is infinite. It does not converge to any finite value. But this context, if we put this value, this infinite sum, in the context of this function, there is actually a way to assign a value to s equals negative 1. And this is what Riemann explained in his paper. And so what Riemann said is that actually we should allow s to be not just a natural number, like for example 2 or 3 or 4, when the series is convergent, but we should allow also all possible real numbers. And not only real numbers, but also complex numbers. The way you get complex numbers is by realizing that within real numbers, you cannot find a square root of negative 1. So what to do? One way is to ban square root of negative 1 and say, this doesn't exist, we cannot use it. But in mathematics, we have understood a long time ago that actually there's a much better way to treat this square root of negative 1. We can simply adjoin it to the real numbers. Think of real numbers as points on the line. Here is 0, and here is 1, and here is 2, and then you can mark your favorite fractions. For example, 1/2 is exactly the middle way between 0 and 1, and say 1 and 1/3 would be sort of a third of the way between 1 and 2. But then you also have things like square root of 2, for example, somewhere here, and then there is pi, which is just to the right of 3. So all real numbers live here. Square root of negative 1 cannot be found anywhere on this line. But we don't give up. We say, you know what, let's actually draw a plane. Let's draw another coordinate system. And let's mark square root of negative 1 on this new coordinate axis. You see, if we do that, then every point on this plane becomes a number. Square root of negative 1 is 1, and here is 2, and then you can mark your favorite fractions. For example, 1/2 is exactly the middle way between 0 and 1, and say 1 and 1/3 would be sort of a third of the way between 1 and 2. But then you also have things like square root of 2, for example, somewhere here, and then there is pi, which is just to the right of 3. So all real numbers live here. Square root of negative 1 cannot be found anywhere on this line. But we don't give up. We say, you know what, let's actually draw a plane. Let's draw another coordinate system. And let's mark square root of negative 1 on this new coordinate axis. You see, if we do that, then every point on this plane becomes a number. So that would be 2 times square root of negative 1. Then if I take 3 times. But more than that, so let me find a number which is on the intersection of this line. I can draw a vertical line which goes from 2, and I can also draw a horizontal line. There is this point of intersection. So this point also will represent a number which will be 2 plus 3 times square root of negative 1. So in other words, a general number is going to have what we call a real part. That's the projection onto this axis, and the imaginary part. That's the projection on the vertical one. The notation is a little bit clumsy. Instead of square root of negative 1, they write I. So then, for example, instead of writing 2 plus 3 square root of negative 1, we'll just write 2 plus 3i. It's an imaginary number. We imagine it. We cannot find it on this real line. So we have imagined it, and then we have joined it in our imagination. Real numbers comprise all points on the real line, on this axis, and complex numbers comprise all the points on this brown paper. If you could extend the brown paper all the way to infinity, right? So let's go back to Riemann. What Riemann's insight was that he said, look, let's think of this argument of the zeta function, this number s. Initially, we thought that s could be 2, 3, 4, and so on. But then we realized that actually any real number to the right of number 1, not including number 1, because actually in this case you cannot assign a value. It's a divergent series and it goes to infinity. But anything to the right, and I'm marking it with red, for all of them, this function is actually well defined. So, but then he said, we can actually do more. We can think of s as being a complex number. So instead of thinking of s as just being a point on this line, we can take s anywhere. It will be convergent if it is to the right of this line. So you see, this is the line which sort of, to the right of this line, live all the complex numbers whose real part is greater than 1. So it turns out, and it's very easy to show, that anywhere in the shaded area, except for this line, so to the right of this line, for any value of s in this area, this function converges to something.
So if I put 6 plus 9i into the Riemann zeta function, I'll get a convergent.
That's right. You'll get a convergent series. It will converge to something, which is not going to be a real number. It's going to be a complex number because you're going to add up infinitely many complex numbers. But there will be a certain number to which will be closer and closer approximated as you go along, summing up this series.
So far, basically everything to the right of this line
gives us a bona fide value.
Will come out to play.
Will come out to play, will give us a bona fide value.
Can the imaginary part go negative?
Yeah, but the imaginary part, yes, the imaginary part is okay, can be negative or positive, but the real part has to be greater than 1. But now you are in the context of a theory of functions with complex argument. And it is what we call a holomorphic function. So it has some very special, very nice properties. So one of the properties that this kind of what we call holomorphic functions enjoy is what we call analytic continuation. So we can extend the definition, the domain of definition of the function.
On va la refaire.
I started using Doodly recently to promote my business and to interact with my students